A couple years ago, my grandma gave me a box, and she told me it was filled with supplies to make a braided rug, and all of the tools are in there, and all of the fabric is in there, and there are even books to tell you how to do it. And if you don't take this, because I'm so fed up with this and it's taking too long, I'm just going to send it to the thrift store and be done with it. And I could not let a good project go to waste, of course. So I said, sure, I'll take it. It's gonna be in storage for a couple of years because I have other projects to do first, but I'll do it. And I thought this was gonna be great. I thought I'm gonna learn a new skill, I'm gonna get a new rug out of it. Well, now that it's been those couple of years, I opened the box and the first thing I saw was just this tangled mess of fabric. And my brain just hated it and said, no way, don't do this, you're gonna drive yourself insane. So of course I thought, first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take this all apart, because my grandma had actually started 4 different rugs. They weren't very big, obviously they all fit into a box, but there were 2 that were braided, and there were 2 that were just strips of fabric that were attached to each other and crocheted. And I needed to undo it, separate out all the colors, and just understand what was here. So I did that, I soaked it in, and I was able to find out that not only do I have these nice balls of fabric, I also have some extra fabric that were just like, they weren't sewed together yet, and they needed to be folded and pressed in order to have these balls of fabric to make your rug even bigger. So I knew that that was going to end up being my first step. I got out these books that I found in there. Some of them are books, some of them are pamphlets. And I've been kind of hopping back and forth, reading through them to get an idea of how I want this rug to go. And they're great about putting in pictures so that you understand what it's talking about. And I really am glad that they are there and I don't have to go online in order to look up all this information. According to this pamphlet by Braidcraft, if you have 2 strips that you want to put together, you lay them so that you have the right sides facing together, which means one side that is wrong is going to be facing towards you. And then you are going to sew across that diagonal right here. So then you can end up trimming off all that excess. Then you're going to be able to flatten it right out, probably with an iron to make sure that that's nice and flat. And then you can use it in your project. So with all those extra strips that I happen to find, I'm going to join them together just like that with my sewing machine. I sewed my strips together, I cut the corners, I flattened them out with my iron, which now leads to having to fold them. You can certainly fold them by hand if you would like. The idea is that you have your edges folded into the middle, and then you fold it up to make your nice 4 layer of braid, or strip, I guess you could call it. One thing that might be really helpful are these cool little tools that seem to have a couple of different names, but in general they tend to be called braiding aids or braiding tools, folding tools. But they're metal, they have a hole right in here so that you can be able to stuff your fabric through with either a needle or a bodkin, which is a lacing tool you would normally use for this project. And the idea is that it folds it for you, and then all you have to do is braid your pieces together. As you can see here, there's one of these tools on each of these strands that are being braided together. So you just kind of zip it along your fabric, make sure it's folded nice, and then braid it in right away. Since I am working with multiple balls of fabric that are already made up, I'm going to actually use this tool to help me press it with the iron so that it's just going to be nice and folded, and if I mess up somehow, it's not going to be an issue. I got my colors figured out for each strand of the braid. The issue that I seem to be having is I don't think that I have an equal amount for each one. So I probably am going to end up grafting some off of the end of, I think, the medium colors in the middle to either the light colors or the dark colors. But we will see as we go on. I sewed these two together by hand real quick, and then I realized that actually this matches this picture pretty darn well. We've got some stripes going on, and then we've got a more solid looking color. And then this is going to end up being color number 3. So the idea is after you graft your pieces together, then you're going to take your third color and you're just going to kind of put it inside and fold it over, and then you're going to, it doesn't even say to sew it, it just says that you're going to start braiding from there, which is pretty cool, which means I'll take this, if I can find the beginning, I'll stick it in here, fold it over, and then I'll just start braiding from there. Pretty neat. So even though that's not sewn in there, because it's going to be braided in, it'll be tucked in really well, and hopefully it won't fray. So after you kind of start getting your braid moving along, I'm going to end up using this contraption that I found in there, and like I couldn't for the life of me figure out what it was for like the first day that I was trying to figure all this out. Turns out you take this side and you hook it over the edge of like a table or a chair or something, and then this side is the clip that you put the end of your braid into, and then you have some tension so that you can make your braid longer without having to worry about, oh, I have to put it down and then oops, I lost my tension and now my braid is not consistent. So that's going to be pretty cool. I don't have a table that this will fit on because all of my tables are pretty thick, so I'm probably going to end up using a chair. Hook this over one side of the chair, and then I can use this side to hold my braid. Oh my goodness, look at all this. Starting over here in the beginning and just working my way and through all of that. It took me over a week, and I am so glad that I am at the very end of it so that I can talk about what to do next. This is a really good example in this pamphlet about how to end your rug. When you get to that last little bit, you want to cut your strands of your braid so that they taper off. And it talks about how the size of the tapered sections depend on how big your rug is going to be. A bigger rug, you might want to have that taper end up being about 1.5 feet long. For something smaller, it should be shorter. But in general, you unfold your pieces of the braid and you fold them in half and pin them together and cut your tapered ends. And then you take your tapered sections and you just kind of tuck them into the few sections of the braid and kind of hide those ends in the length of the braid, which is actually pretty interesting because if you have a smaller rug and in the future you end up with more fabric and want to make it bigger, you can untuck those ends and then you can just add your extra pieces of fabric on and make your braid longer and bigger so that you have a bigger rug in the future. So I've reached the end of my braid. It's sitting here on my chair, and I've just kind of used a pin to keep it in place while I am not braiding anymore. And I'm gonna keep it pinned, but I'm just gonna end up cutting the ends of this braid so that I don't have these little balls of fabric attached to my braid anymore. And that way I can maneuver it how I want to figure out what my braid should end up looking like. But for the amount of different fabrics that I had, having these two left isn't too bad. Alright, I'm gonna cut them at different lengths so that I can do the tapering later once I figure out how I want my rug to look. So I'm gonna cut this one way out here. And then I'm going to cut this one even farther out. And then hopefully when I go to taper off the ends, I will be able to adjust it accordingly and it will be finished when it's finished. I took my braid and I decided to just kind of put it in a spiral just to see how big this rug was going to end up being. So it's not laced together yet. And honestly, it's a pretty decent sized rug. This is my hand for comparison, just to show you that it's not as small as one would think. Now, if you are going to do it in this manner where you make a large braid and then you lay it out to see how you want it to look, I recommend getting some knee pads because being on the floor for that long to get the spiral out was uncomfortable after a little while. And having somebody help me by untwisting the braid while I laid the braid out made it go a lot faster. So now the question is, do I want it in a circle? Do I want it in a square or a rectangle or an oval? Do I want it kind of long and skinny or short and wide? Or maybe I want to do something completely different, like make it in a heart shape or make it in like a star shape or something else like that. I even saw in one of the books that there was the shape of a cat where it was two circles, one on top of the other, and then they put some little extra bits to make ears and a tail, and it was really cute. But I'm really liking how the colors play out. You have kind of light colors in the middle, and then as you go outwards it gets darker, and then it gets lighter again, and it's kind of just like a neat springy, sunshiny type of pattern. One thing to think about when you're considering the shape of your rug is, what does the space that you want it to go in look like? Is it a hallway? That's going to want something long and skinny like a rectangle or a really long oval. Is it going to be in the middle of a room where having a circle or a shorter, wider oval or rectangle might be better? Or maybe it's in front of a fireplace where you want it to be more like a rainbow shape so that it is flat against the wall and just kind of sticks out a little bit. Or maybe you want it in the bathroom where you don't really need a big rug, you just need something small to fit down and keep your feet warm between the toilet and the sink. So lots of things to consider when you're trying to figure out, what do I want my rug to look like? So as we know, I did my entire braid first and now I'm going to lace, but in this pamphlet it talks about lacing as you go to, one, avoid tangling. I did notice that as I was trying to deal with the entire braid that it did kind of twist up on itself quite a bit, but also there's this thing here where as you're going around that place where you want it to turn, if you want it to turn naturally without forcing it, you can braid it a specific way so that it will naturally want to turn around. And that is a really useful tip that I did not know about because I did not read about this thoroughly enough until now. But I wanted to talk about lacing because that's what I'm going to start now. And the idea is that you fold your braid in half first, you kind of lace back and forth a few times, and then you do some extra around the edge. And going around that curve, around the edge, is a little bit different because you have to do some skipping of loops in order to make sure that it doesn't end up causing ruffles in your rug. You want it to lay flat, not be all bunched up. In this book here, it talks about how to position your braids so that it will naturally just kind of cinch together. As you can see, they're not exactly side by side, they're slightly off so that the lacing will easily just go back and forth. Further down on that same page, it talks about what the secret of a flat rug is. And I think right here is a good synopsis. Always skip on the curve of the rug. So if you have an oval, when you're going up the straight side, you're just going to go back and forth between all of the stitches. But when it starts to curve around, that is when you're going to start skipping loops, as it says here. And the idea is that skipping a loop is always done on the outside braid, never on the rug itself. So you have your rug, you're going around the curve of that rug, and you go through a stitch, and then you skip a loop on the outside, and then you go through a stitch, skip a loop on the outside. So that way you're going to have space for the rug to adjust itself, but it's going to be attached to the inside braid that is on the body of the rug. This is one of the pamphlets that I received, and it also talks about keeping it flat. It says, after lacing through a loop on the outer braid, then through the next loop on the body of the rug, so that inside braid, then you skip a loop on the outer braid and lace the following loop into the very next loop on the body of the rug. So the only time that you're skipping loops is on the new section of braid on the outside of the rug, not on the inside curve itself. I thought I would include this picture of a lady sitting on the floor lacing her rug. It seems that sitting on the floor is going to be a big part of lacing, because the bigger the rug gets, the harder it's going to be to maintain it in your lap. And also, sitting on the floor, a nice big flat surface, is going to be the best way to make sure that your rug is flat when you're trying to get those curves to line up and not get all ruffly. So I have my braid, which is wound up to a really quite sizable ball of just braided fabric, and I brought this out to show you because I thought it would be interesting to show off what a bodkin looks like. A bodkin. So it's basically just a piece of flattened metal, like a flat needle. It's not sharp, and it's got 2 holes in there, which you would put your thread through in order to be able to use this, and then you would basically stick it through your braid in order to lace the braid together. But I am not going to be using this. So because instead of thread, I'm going to use this extra fabric that my grandma stuffed in there. So these pieces of fabric, they have these holes in the ends. And the idea was she would just link the 2 pieces of fabric together, and then she would crochet a little bit, and then she'd link another piece and crochet some more. And I said, well, why don't I use this to lace my rug together, just to try and use up some of this fabric, because I don't really want to do a crochet rug. So I already took this and I kind of just put it through one loop, and I just kind of looped it through itself. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be interesting. And the idea is I'm going to do a circle. I tried putting it in an oval shape, and the colors, they kind of didn't come out in a fashion that I liked. We had one color down the middle, and then coming back we had a different color, and then coming back we had another color, and I just didn't like how it looked. In a circle, it will even out where the colors start and end much more nicely. So the idea is I'm gonna take it, fold it in half, and I'm just gonna kind of stitch a little, and then I'm gonna stitch a little bit more loosely around the end, and then I'm just gonna keep coiling it. And after a couple of rounds, it's gonna actually start looking more like a circle and less like a weird squished oval. I thought I would just go through the first few stitches with you just to kind of show off how the stitches are going to work. We are basically going to do, I believe it's called a mattress stitch, where you kind of go in and out, and then you cross over and go in and out, cross over, go in and out. So first I have to figure out where I want my first stitch to be. I think I want it to be kind of small in the middle. So I'm going to go in and out here. And then because this is going around basically just the end, and I didn't want this inside piece to come out, I did end up stitching along that line just to keep that inside piece in there. So I'm going to go back through this right here. Just like that. And then I'm gonna kind of come around and be like, where do I want my next stitch? I think I'm gonna skip this one and put it through this yellow one right here. And now I am going to put this stitch in the same orientation as the one before. Now when you are using your thread, you are supposed to kind of hide it in the folds of these stitches, but because I have a much thicker piece of fabric, and because it is fabric, I think it's just going to hide itself anyway. So I'm going to come through here. And that is just going to hide the tip of my end there. And yeah, I'm going to come through this brown one. Now, because this is the very beginning, it is starting to try and curl up, but when I add more braid onto it, that will hopefully weight it down and stretch it out so it'll be flat in the center. So I am going through the very next loop on this inside section here. Oop. There we go, much better. And then this is a circle, which means I am going to be doing a lot more skipping than if this was an oval. So I am going to skip this yellow one and do some green. And I picked this piece of fabric for the center because the center colors are going to be very light, and I thought the lighter color fabric will just kind of match up and just kind of blend right in. Alright, so I went through the green, I went through this yellow before I went through the green, so I'm going to go back just through this next green one, and then I'm going to skip the brown and do the yellow, I believe. that, it's already starting to look like a circle. That's pretty cool. Yep, so I went through this yellow one, and then I went through this green one, and then I'm gonna skip the brown one and go through the yellow one in order to then go through this brown one here on the inside. And because I'm doing the skipping on the outside loop, it's actually lying pretty flat right now, even though it is still very small. So I'm going to keep going and going and going until it's done. And then as it gets bigger, as the book said, we're probably going to end up doing more skipping. So instead of every other one, as it gets bigger, we might end up skipping 2 outside ones to then connect to an inside piece. So I have been rolling this out on my kitchen floor to work on it because it's gotten too big for my table. And I have to deal with it getting all wrinkly because something is a little too tight, and I have to basically massage it out. I walk on it, I use my hands, I rub it back and forth so that it will flatten out nice and flat so that I can work on it some more. And this is something that when I started to notice it, I probably should have ripped back, but I had been, because I was working with this on the table, I was way out to here, and I did not want to rip that much back in order to fix it. So it's just going to be like that. I started this project back in May, and guess what? It's August now. Braiding rugs is not a quick process at all. Because of my job, I ended up doing this on weekends, I ended up doing it late at night, and there were a few times I set it up so that I could do it in the morning just to try and get it all done. And after this project, I don't know if I'll ever want to make a braided rug again. But since we have come to the end of our braided rug, I decided to look back through my books and pamphlets to see if I could find information about how to make this look nice at the end. And I was surprised. I only found information about this in 2 of the 4 sources of material. So this pamphlet about braiding for everybody, it talks about opening your fabric and tapering it off, sewing the ends together so that you have nice little tails that you can then weave into the edges of your rug. And because it's tapered off, it's not an abrupt stop that you have to then worry about sewing into place. And this one here about braiding rugs talks about if you have a 4 by 5 foot rug or larger, you should do this same process but with about 1.5 feet of the end of the braid. So it's the same idea. You open it up, you taper it off, and you'll be able to weave the ends into your rug so that it doesn't just abruptly end. And this picture up here is really nice because it talks about how your braid should end on a curve so that it's a lot less noticeable than if you were stopping, say, in the middle of a straight section. And it does give the idea that if you do a rectangle that you should probably end it around a corner. Because this rug is round, I don't think it really matters where I end it, and so I get to use as much fabric as possible. So this is the very last 1.5 feet of my braid, and I have put a pin over here to kind of hold this in place so that I don't unravel too far, because I know me, I'll do that. I'll unravel the braid to here, and then I will open each individual strand. I'll fold them in half and pin them together. Alright, so I open them flat, and folded them in half. So they're in half right now, not quarters like the rest of the rug. And I pinned them so they would stay flat. And then I went into the garage and I found a level that has a nice straight edge on it. And I got a marker and I used that to kind of just make a line from one end to the other, so that I just had something to generically follow when I was cutting away all this extra fabric. I trimmed my ends so that they are tapered off. And the next thing I have to do, I reread my paper again. I have to fold it back into quarters as best I can and then sew along the edge so that it doesn't come apart and unravel. So I sewed down the edges of every single one of these tapered ends. And now I have to actually weave it into the braid and finish off the rug. So basically I have to find where this would want to go into my rug, kind of put my crochet hook up in there. And then kind of just bring it through. And then you just start braiding your rug again. And then you find the next location that this would want to go into, which I think would be here. And then braid some more. And then keep going all the way to get to the end. Okay, so we've come to the end of weaving in the braid because, as you can see here, we have the last little bit of blue. So what's going to happen is this is going to be sewn to the underside. Then this one is going to be woven into the next and sewn to the underside, and then this will end up being the last one to get tucked in and sewn on the underside as well. Just 1 or 2 stitches to hold it in place, and that is the end of the braid. It's going to be done. So now that I've braided it in and I have tucked in the ends and sewn them down, you can see how nicely that disappears, because that whole section started way over here and it ended way over here, and it kind of just disappears into the rug, which is the whole point. I hope this helped you figure out whether or not you want to make your own braided rug and gave you some ideas on how to get it done. Happy crafting!